Welcome to the CSS Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your instructor, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about the tools for CSS. What is a CSS style sheet, and how do we develop CSS style sheets for our websites? So what are CSS style sheets? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Styles define how we display our HTML elements inside of our browser windows. Styles were added to HTML in version 4.0 to separate styling from structure. External style sheets can save a tremendous amount of work, as you will learn as you go through these tutorials. External style sheets are stored in CSS files. And if you did the previous tutorial with me where we talked about the CSS reset, you saw exactly how we store the majority of our CSS styles in an external sheet that's linked to the HTML document using a link tag. CSS files are plain text documents incorporating the CSS styling language. Styles were developed to solve a problem. HTML, or hypertext markup language, was never intended to contain tags for formatting documents. HTML was designed to define content of a document, for instance, headings, paragraphs, anchor tags, but it was never meant to incorporate styling. When tags like font and color attributes were added to the HTML 3.2 specification, it started a nightmare for web developers. Development of large websites where fonts and color information were added to every single page became a long and expensive process. If you had a 100-page website, can you imagine formatting your fonts and formatting the color of your text or the color of your borders individually in each particular element in HTML? In HTML 3.2, that's what occurred. When we started adding styling tags into HTML, maintaining websites became an absolute nightmare. So styles were developed to solve a problem. To solve the problem, the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, created CSS. In HTML4, all formatting could be removed from the HTML document and stored in a separate CSS file. All modern browsers support CSS. And as they've gone along, more and more we're seeing that not only are they beginning to support it, or actually, I shouldn't say beginning, because they support CSS very well, but now they're all becoming very standardized in how they support it. Where we used to have to write a lot of different things for different types of browsers or different type of rendering engines, now it's pretty much standard across the board. The W3C.org is the standards body for not only HTML, but for CSS and CSS3. CSS defines how HTML elements are to be displayed on a web browser, in a web page. Styles are normally saved in an external CSS style sheet. External style sheets enable you to change the appearance and layout of all the pages of a website just by editing the styles file. And you're going to see that as we go through these tutorials. Having external CSS style sheets makes designing your websites very, very consistent and very, very easy compared to how it used to be. This will be demonstrated many, many times as we go throughout the tutorials. So let's talk about our development environment, because as we're writing these CSS styles, obviously we've got to have a development environment that we can test what we're doing. Confirming we have a development environment configured and working correctly is something I do at the beginning of almost all my tutorials. The first thing you'll need to do when starting on your journey to learn CSS is to have a CSS development environment configured on your desktop computer. And you'll hear me refer to that as your development platform, because that's what it is. Your desktop computer becomes your development platform as you start writing HTML and CSS. If you've noticed, I begin most of my tutorials by confirming that the Apache server is up and running and we have our text editor loaded and ready to go. Once our development environment is configured, we move on to the text editor. We create our own CSS files with the text editor, not a word processor, not WordPad, but a true text editor. And there are tutorials in the tools section of this website that talk about setting up a WAMP server or an XAMPP server, and talk about different text editors that are available for you to use, both free and editors that you can purchase, to help you develop your HTML and your CSS technologies. There are numerous good text editors out in the market, both for free and for some have a cost associated with them. Starting out, I'd choose the free ones that are out there. Until you figure out exactly what you want to do and until you get comfortable with how you're working inside HTML and CSS, start out with a free editor and then learn more and more about the scripting languages. You'll understand when you start reading about the different text editors and what they do, and you'll know what you need based on what your understanding is of the scripting languages. What you're looking for in a text editor: basic editing features in the text editor should include line numbering, code formatting, syntax highlighting, and support for different scripting environments. And what I mean by that is you want a good text editor that will support HTML, preferably HTML5 because that's the newest standard, CSS3 and CSS. And if you plan to really move into dynamic web design, you'll want something that will do PHP and probably JavaScript. Most good text editors will easily handle all of those scripting languages and more. The majority of text editors will support all the technologies used in web development: HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript, etc. So once you learn one tool, you're normally set as you continue to learn your development technologies. Confirming we have a development environment configured. I use many different text editors as I develop, but the one that I've been using most often is Sublime Text 2. It's not a free editor and has many features that you'll probably not need as you're starting out, but it's something that I've become very, very familiar with over the last couple of years. An excellent free text editor is Aptana Studios for Windows. Aptana, you can see the website below, is an excellent text editor to start out with. And we're going to go through a couple not only for Windows but also for the Macintosh. Recommended text editors is Notepad++, excellent editor for Windows. Text Wrangler for the Macintosh, a very good text editor. It's written by the same company that writes BBEdit, which is their paid text editor. Text Wrangler has a lot of the same features, and it's a very good text editor, especially considering the cost, which is free. Smalltrun for the Mac, another excellent text editor. gedit for Linux is a really good text editor. Bluefish Editor is an excellent text editor if you want cross-platform. I do a lot of stuff on both Windows and Macintosh. When I work across platforms, I tend to use Bluefish because the files are compatible and you don't have to relearn the interface. And Komodo Edit's another excellent editor for both the Windows, the Macintosh, and Linux. There are many, many good text editors out there. A good Google search will turn up oodles of them. Alright, so let's go look at the development environment that I've set up and the development environment I expect you to have so that you can be successful in this tutorial series. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that presentation. So the first thing we're going to want you to have is you're going to need your Apache server up and running. For 99% of the tutorials, we're going to be doing lab exercises. In order for you to get the most out of the training experience, you'll need an Apache server installed on your development machine and up and running as we begin the tutorials. If you're not certain how to install one, under the Tools section of the website, there's a two-part series on how to install and configure your Apache server on your development platform. So we'll want to get that up and running. The next thing you're going to need is you're going to need a good text editor. I tend to use Sublime Text 2. That's the one that you see on the right-hand side of my screen. That's the editor I like to use. You can use whatever editor you want. There are oodles of them out there. I gave you a whole list of them in the presentation just prior to this display of what I'm doing. But you'll need a good text editor. And then the last thing you're going to need a couple of web browsers. You're going to want Google Chrome. I tend to use Google Chrome quite a bit as I compare sites. Oh, and by the way, if you did the previous tutorial with me, don't be concerned that you don't see this CSS reset in place. It's not installed on this particular portion of the tutorials. So that's why you see the default formatting for these particular browsers. But I've got Google Chrome set up and installed, and with access to my Apache Web server. I also have Safari, because I use Safari quite a bit. Safari is a very popular browser, configured and having access to my web server. I also use Firefox, configured with access to my web server. And I also use Internet Explorer, configured with access to my Apache web server. So you'll have the majority of your 4 web browsers. Those are the most popular: Firefox, Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer. Opera's there too, so I mean, if you want to bring up Opera, that's not a bad idea because there's quite a few people out there that use it. You'll want to have a good text editor, and you'll want to have your Apache web server up and running as we begin our tutorial series. So, if you've got all that stuff, we're ready to dive in.